No contact is often misunderstood as a simple act of cutting communication. In reality, it is a highly disruptive psychological intervention that alters the entire dynamic between you and a narcissist. It is not about silence for the sake of avoidance. It is about removing the mechanisms that allow the narcissist to function in relation to you. When applied consistently, no contact does not just create distance, it destabilizes the internal system that depended on your presence. To understand why silence can feel so powerful, you have to first understand how a narcissist maintains psychological stability. Their sense of self is not fully self-generated. It is externally regulated through what is commonly referred to as narcissistic supply. This supply includes attention, admiration, emotional reactions, and even conflict. What matters is not whether the interaction is positive or negative. What matters is that it confirms their relevance, their impact, and their presence in your mental space. When you are engaged with a narcissist, even in conflict, you are providing data. You are signaling that they matter, that they can influence your emotions, and that they still occupy space in your thoughts. This is why arguments, explanations, and emotional reactions often strengthen the bond rather than weaken it. From their perspective, any response is a form of connection, and any connection is a form of supply. No contact removes all of this at once. It is not a gradual reduction. It is an abrupt disconnection. There are no responses, no reactions, no updates, and no emotional feedback. This creates a condition that is extremely difficult for a narcissist to process because it eliminates their ability to predict and control the interaction. The first phase of no contact is typically dismissal. The narcissist assumes that your silence is temporary. Based on past patterns, they expect that you will eventually re-engage. They may interpret your absence as a tactic, an attempt to gain attention, provoke jealousy, or create emotional leverage. Because of this assumption, they do not initially experience urgency. Instead, they wait. During this waiting period, their internal model remains intact. You are still categorized as accessible. The system has not yet been updated to reflect a permanent loss. This is why, in the early stages, you may not see any visible reaction. This absence of reaction is often misinterpreted as indifference. In reality, it is a miscalculation. The second phase begins when the expected re-engagement does not occur. Time passes and your silence remains consistent. At this point, the narcissist starts to experience a disruption in expectation. This is where cognitive dissonance emerges. Their internal narrative, "they always come back," no longer aligns with reality. This inconsistency creates psychological tension. To resolve this tension, the narcissist typically initiates contact. These attempts are rarely direct expressions of vulnerability. Instead, they are controlled, minimal, and often ambiguous. A simple message, a casual check-in, or a seemingly neutral comment is used to test whether the connection is still active. The goal is not necessarily to reconnect emotionally, but to confirm access. If you respond even briefly, the system recalibrates. The narcissist receives confirmation that you are still available, and the previous dynamic can be reactivated. This is why partial no contact is ineffective. Intermittent responses reinforce the behavior, making it more persistent. From a behavioral standpoint, inconsistency strengthens the pattern rather than breaking it. If you do not respond, the narcissist moves into a more unstable phase. The lack of feedback prevents them from resolving the cognitive dissonance. They can no longer rely on past patterns to predict your behavior. This uncertainty is deeply uncomfortable because it removes their sense of control. At this stage, their behavior may escalate. They might increase the frequency of their attempts, shift their tone, or introduce new strategies. This can include more emotional messages, indirect communication through social media, or attempts to provoke a reaction. In some cases, they may alternate between warmth and hostility. These fluctuations are not random. They are adaptive strategies designed to elicit any form of response. What is critical to understand is that the narcissist is not responding to you as a person, but to the absence of supply. The escalation is driven by deprivation. Without access to your attention or emotional energy, their usual methods of self-regulation are compromised. They are attempting to restore equilibrium. If no contact is maintained through this phase, a deeper level of disruption occurs. The narcissist begins to lose the ability to define themselves in relation to you. Previously, your reactions helped reinforce their identity. Your admiration confirmed their superiority. Your frustration confirmed their impact. Your forgiveness confirmed their control. Without these reflections, their self-image becomes less stable. This is where silence becomes psychologically significant. It forces the narcissist into a position where they cannot rely on external validation from you. They are left with their internal state, which is often less coherent and more fragile than it appears externally. This can lead to increased restlessness, irritability, or a sense of emptiness. In response, many narcissists seek alternative sources of supply. This is often observed as a rapid transition into new relationships or increased social activity. These behaviors are not necessarily indicators of emotional recovery. They are compensatory mechanisms. The goal is to replace the lost input as quickly as possible to stabilize their internal system. However, replacement is not always equivalent. If your role in their life provided a high level of consistency or intensity, new sources may not immediately fulfill the same function. This can prolong the instability and increase their focus on you, even in your absence. They may monitor your activity indirectly, attempt to gather information about you, or compare new individuals to you. At this point, a form of delayed recognition can occur. The narcissist begins to understand that your absence is not temporary. The possibility of regaining access diminishes. This realization is not necessarily emotional in the way people expect. It is often cognitive. They recognize that a reliable source of supply is no longer available. This is the phase where silence destroys the narcissist. But the term destroys requires clarification. It does not mean that they collapse completely or undergo a sudden transformation. It means that the structure that once depended on you is no longer functional. The specific dynamic that gave them stability has been dismantled. Importantly, this process does not guarantee growth or change. Some narcissists will adapt by fully redirecting their attention elsewhere. Others may experience prolonged dissatisfaction or frustration. In rare cases, the disruption can lead to increased self-awareness, but this typically requires conditions beyond the loss of a single relationship. From your perspective, the effectiveness of no contact lies in what it removes. It removes the feedback loop that kept you engaged. It removes the intermittent reinforcement that made the relationship difficult to leave. It removes the constant evaluation of their behavior and replaces it with a focus on your own internal state. This shift is not immediate. In the early stages of no contact, you may experience withdrawal-like symptoms. This includes urges to check on them, to respond, or to seek closure. These reactions are consistent with the breaking of a reinforced behavioral cycle. The relationship, despite being harmful, created patterns of emotional dependency that take time to dissolve. Maintaining no contact through this phase is critical. Each moment of silence reinforces a new pattern. Each decision not to engage strengthens your autonomy. Over time, the absence of interaction reduces the emotional intensity associated with the narcissist. The focus gradually shifts from them to you. As this shift continues, the question of what the narcissist is feeling becomes less relevant. Their internal state no longer determines your emotional stability. Whether they are attempting to reconnect, replacing you, or reflecting on the past, does not alter the fact that the dynamic has ended. In this context, no contact is not a strategy to provoke a reaction. It is not a method of making them miss you or regret losing you. Those outcomes may occur, but they are secondary. The primary function of no contact is structural. It dismantles the system that allowed the narcissistic dynamic to persist. The silence works because it removes participation. Without participation, there is no interaction. Without interaction, there is no reinforcement. And without reinforcement, the pattern cannot continue. Ultimately, the power of no contact is not in what it does to the narcissist, but in what it does for you. It creates the conditions necessary for psychological separation. It allows you to rebuild your sense of self without constant external interference. It shifts control away from the dynamic and back to you. When this process is complete, the The silence is no longer an effort. It becomes your default state. The absence of contact is no longer something you maintain. It is simply the natural outcome of no longer being connected. At that point, the question of whether silence affects the narcissist becomes irrelevant. The dynamic has ended, the system has collapsed, and what remains is not destruction, but independence.